There's a certain quiet to rural mornings, before the birds get too chatty, before the heat starts rising off the dirt, when all you can hear is your own breath and the hum of an old engine coming to life. That's when I do my best thinking, right as my boots hit the ground and the tractor rumbles awake. My name's Hank Walker. I'm a third-generation farmer, born and raised in Cedar Hills, back when it was just fields, creeks, and gravel roads. These days, folks call it a lifestyle community. They slapped vinyl-sided homes where orchards used to be and installed HOAs to keep people from painting their shutters the wrong shade of beige. I never voted for it, never wanted it, but I stayed because the land doesn't care about bylaws and neither do I. One stretch of that land, about a quarter-mile dirt track cutting straight through the west field, is my tractor path. It's not fancy. No pavement. No signs. But it's the artery that keeps this place running. Every planting season, every harvest, that path's what gets the job done. I don't expect people to understand it. I just expect them to stay the hell off it. Enter Karen Delaney. Karen's not from here. Moved in about 2 years ago with her husband, Dale, and immediately decided Cedar Hills was her kingdom. She didn't care that her manicured yard backed up to working farmland. She didn't care that her dog kept scaring off the guinea hens. What she cared about was rules, hers, and the power to enforce them. Karen wasn't just on the HOA board. She was the board. I'd had run-ins with her before. A warning notice for having unsightly equipment too close to the fence line. A strongly worded letter about unregistered livestock because my niece brought over her 4-H goat. But all of that was background noise compared to what I found on a Friday morning in mid-April. I was headed out at dawn. Same as always. The tractor was loaded, the plow oiled and ready. I had 10 acres of spring tilling to get done before the rain came. As I approached the path, I slowed. Squinted. Something was off. There were chairs. Rows and rows of white folding chairs lining both sides of the dirt. Satin ribbons fluttered on wooden posts. An archway, wooden, draped in sheer fabric and fake roses, stood dead center like some misplaced shrine. And right there, in the middle of it all, stood Karen. She was wearing a pastel tracksuit, clipboard in hand, barking orders at a man carrying speaker equipment. A catering van was parked on the shoulder. Another woman was unfolding linen tablecloths beside a pile of gift boxes. It was a full-blown wedding setup. I stopped the tractor, let the engine idle, and climbed down. Karen, I said, voice even. What exactly is this? She turned, radiant and smug, like she'd just been named Grand Marshal of a parade. Oh, Hank, isn't it beautiful? My niece's wedding. We wanted that rustic, farmhouse aesthetic, very Pinterest chic. This little road was just perfect. This little road is my tractor path, I said, slow and deliberate. I need it today. Karen's smile didn't waver. Oh, it's just one day. The ceremony's at noon. Reception ends by dusk. You can use it tomorrow. No harm done. Ma'am, I said, trying hard not to let my jaw clench. This path is how I till and seed 10 acres of corn.
Today.
There's rain coming tonight. Karen's eyes narrowed, voice shifting to syrupy condescension. Hank, don't be difficult. You've got other routes, don't you? This wedding means a lot to my family. You of all people should understand community over convenience. I looked at the arch, at the sound system, at the catered food and flower arrangements being unloaded like this was some high-end estate. This isn't convenience, I said. This is trespassing. She blinked, her smile twitching. Oh, don't be dramatic. Everyone's so excited to be out here. You should be honored. I didn't answer. Just turned, walked back to the cab, and drove off, slow, steady, deliberate. Not because I was giving in. Because I had thinking to do. That path was more than dirt. It was history. It was purpose. And Karen had paved over it with her entitlement like it was nothing. She thought she'd won. That I'd just wait politely, like some background character in her big event. But what she didn't know, what she'd never understand, is that land like mine doesn't yield. Not to weddings. Not to HOAs. And sure as hell not to people who think rural means disposable. She'd made a mistake, and I was about to plow it clean. The tractor path stayed blocked all day. By noon, the chairs were in perfect rows. The arch stood polished and proud. White tents fluttered under the spring breeze, anchored not just by stakes, but by the smug weight of Karen Delaney's authority. Every time I passed the field's edge, hauling supplies or checking irrigation lines, I saw her pacing with a Bluetooth headset, micromanaging florists and photographers like a tyrant general preparing for battle. She never once looked my way. I didn't confront her, didn't argue. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in watching someone hang their own rope, quiet, patient, inevitable. And I had rope. Legal, documented, notarized rope. That evening, I dug out the land surveys, kept in a fireproof tin box beneath my desk. My grandfather's handwriting scrawled along the edges of the oldest maps, denoting access lanes, fencing agreements, irrigation rights. Everything about that dirt path was clear. It was my property, my equipment access, and my liability if something went wrong. Karen hadn't asked for permission, hadn't offered compensation. She'd just decided, like she always did, that her desires outweighed my rights. But what she lacked in humility, she made up for in clout. The HOA backed her every move. Always had. They let her add a second gate to the clubhouse for aesthetics, repainted all mailboxes to match her preferred shade of ivory, and passed an ordinance requiring all Christmas lights to come down by January 2nd, prompted by a neighbor leaving his twinkle lights up one day too long. That neighbor had moved away last fall. Karen had no interest in rules unless she was the one making them. To her, Cedar Hills wasn't a community, it was a stage. And I was just another prop. I spent the evening making calls. Not to lawyers or local officials, no need. The law was already on my side. I called Pete instead. Pete's my nearest neighbor, 3 lots down. Grew up here like I did. Doesn't say much unless there's beer involved. But when he heard what Karen was doing, he whistled through his teeth. She tell folks she had your okay, he asked. She told them I was honored to host, I replied. He laughed so hard I heard the phone hit his porch railing. You plannin' to let her finish the ceremony, he asked. Depends how early I feel like starting. Pete didn't press further. Just said, let me know if you need a witness. That night, I sat on the porch and watched dusk settle across the land. The wedding crew left around 8, promising to return at first light. I could still hear Karen's voice across the distance, giving final instructions with the tone of someone convinced they'd earned the world. She hadn't earned anything. I didn't need revenge. I needed respect. That's when the idea came, not petty, not loud, just corrective. Elegant even. A farmer's version of poetry. I walked to the barn in the dark, flashlight bobbing, and uncovered the John Deere 7810. She was an old girl but well-kept. Engine just serviced, blade sharp. I spent the next hour tuning the hydraulics, checking the fuel, and backing her into place just a few yards from the wedding arch. The smell of soil clung to everything. I didn't mind. The land was ready. I was ready. At 4:55 the next morning, I woke to silence and slipped into my boots. No grand speech. No dramatic entrance. Just a quiet mission and a green engine idling like a beast waiting for its leash to snap. I opened the barn doors and looked out at the field. The morning mist clung low, veiling the wedding setup in a ghostly sheen. The chairs stood obedient. The arch waited patiently. The silence dared me to break it. And I did. I climbed into the cab and turned the key. The tractor roared to life with a thunder that cracked across the sleeping neighborhood like judgment. I didn't pause. Didn't hesitate. I dropped the plow. Steel met earth with a shuddering rip, and the path ahead, lined with someone else's fantasy, began to fall. The chairs would tumble. The arch would shatter. The wedding would not proceed as planned. Karen had gambled on silence. She was about to learn what happens when the land answers back. The sound of the tractor echoed like a war drum. The plow bit into the earth with steady force, carving through layers of soil and sentiment alike. Wedding chairs scattered like startled pigeons, some toppling in pairs, others crunching under the iron weight of inevitability. The arch split clean down the center, its pastel ribbons sucked into the churned dirt like confetti in a tornado. I didn't stop. Not when the sound system cracked and sparked beneath my wheels. Not when the silk-covered tables twisted into heaps of steel and shame. I plowed straight down the center of my path, until I reached the old elm that marked its end. Then I killed the engine and climbed down. Silence. Thick and absolute. Until a shriek split the air.
Karen.
She came tearing across the back lawn in a satin robe, slippers kicking up grass, phone in one hand, the other waving wildly, like she could swat away the sight. Her husband, Dale, followed behind her at a safer distance, tugging on a polo shirt, face already locked in damage control mode. "What did you do?" Karen screamed, breathless with disbelief. I stood beside the tractor, arms crossed, boots thick with fresh soil. "I started work," I said, voice calm. "Like I do every year, every spring, at this exact time." "You destroyed everything," she shrieked. "My niece is supposed to walk down this aisle in 3 hours." "No aisle here," I replied. "Just my tractor path. And my private property." Karen was trembling now, eyes wild. "You can't just. This was a family event. We had guests coming. A minister. A photographer. You had a fantasy," I said. "On someone else's land." Her face flushed crimson, either from fury or shame. Maybe both. "You should have told me." "I did," I said. "Yesterday morning. When I asked you to move it. When you called me difficult and said I should feel honored." Behind her, Dale muttered something under his breath. She spun and snapped at him to stay out of it, then turned back to me, seething. "You're going to pay for this," she hissed. "You violated HOA decorum. There are policies about disrupting community events." "HOA's got no jurisdiction here," I replied, pointing to the weathered post on the field's edge. "Survey marker. End of their domain. You don't get to ruin someone's wedding just because you're bitter and stuck in the past," she spat. I looked her dead in the eye.
"No, Karen."
"I didn't ruin a wedding. You did, when you thought your celebration was more important than someone else's livelihood. When you believed rules only mattered when they served you." The standoff stretched long and bitter. Then came the soft crunch of gravel. Pete's truck pulled up alongside the field, windows down. He gave a slow nod as he took in the carnage, toppled tents, shredded decor. Karen's spiraling meltdown. "You need me to testify," he called out. Karen turned on him like a feral cat. "You think this is funny?" "Nope," Pete said. "Think it's overdue." Other neighbors were starting to emerge now, some in pajamas, some clutching coffee, all drawn by the roar that had broken the morning. A few filmed quietly from their porches. One older couple just stood watching, their faces unreadable, but clearly not sympathetic to Karen's plight. She seemed to realize then that the tide wasn't turning in her favor, that her empire of picket fences and petty power plays had finally hit bedrock. "This isn't over," she muttered, more to herself than anyone. "You're right," I said. "It's not." Because I wasn't finished. The HOA would try to sweep this under the rug. Karen would try to spin the story. But I had photographs, survey maps, witnesses, and a stack of printed emails showing exactly how she'd bypassed process, ignored protocols, and orchestrated the whole event without so much as a formal request. I wasn't just going to stand up for my land. I was going to expose how deep her entitlement ran. As Karen stormed off in a flurry of silk and curses, I climbed back onto the tractor. The sun was finally cresting over the eastern ridge, lighting up the freshly tilled path in golden tones. The job still wasn't done. Not the field work. Not the reckoning. But I'd laid the first furrow clean and straight. And by the time I was finished, the roots of Karen's reign would be turned up and exposed, just like the weeds I plowed through every spring. Karen filed a complaint the next morning. 2, actually, one with the HOA board and another with the county sheriff's department. Claimed property damage, emotional distress, and sabotage of a once-in-a-lifetime family event. She arrived at the board meeting with a folder of photographs and a tearful speech about community betrayal. But the evidence didn't care about her tears. I showed up with my own folder, surveys marked in bold ink, email transcripts, time-stamped photos, and video footage. Pete backed me up with a witness statement. So did two other neighbors. And the sheriff? He took one look at the boundary lines and said, "Ma'am, you held a private event on someone else's land without permission. That's trespassing, not sabotage." Karen turned crimson again. But this time, there was no ceremony to hijack. No audience to charm. Just a room full of residents who had, for years, swallowed her micromanagement and passive-aggressive rules. And now they saw her for what she truly was, a tyrant in pearls. When the board voted to remove her as chair, it wasn't close. 5-1. She didn't even have Dale's vote. By the end of the week, the HOA had issued a formal apology and rescinded Karen's wedding-related expenses from the community fund. Turns out, she'd siphoned nearly $4,000 for extra parking coordination, emergency landscaping, and a luxury porta-potty suite. None of it had been approved. The refund checks went back to homeowners. Karen went silent. Her once daily HOA emails vanished overnight. The sign in her front yard, Cedar Hills, pride in every porch, came down 2 days later. I didn't gloat.
Didn't need to.
Watching Karen walk her yappy little dog past my field without a word, her gaze fixed on the gravel, was victory enough. The path? I reseeded it a week later, gave the soil some rest. The plow had done its job, not just in the field, but across the power lines Karen had drawn in her mind. And with her gone from the board, Cedar Hills breathed easier. Fewer citations. Fewer restrictions. People started talking to each other again over fences across porches at the Saturday market. Even Dale stopped by one afternoon. He stood awkwardly near the barn while I unloaded feed bags. "Just wanted to say," he began, scratching his neck, "I didn't know she was using your land. Thought she had it worked out with you."
She didn't, I said.
He nodded.
"Well,
"Guess you sorted it out just fine." He turned to leave, then paused. "She's talking about moving. Says the neighborhood's changed." "It hasn't," I said. "She just doesn't run it anymore." He gave a short laugh, almost embarrassed, and walked off. In early summer, I hosted a barbecue. Open invite. Everyone came, neighbors from all ends of Cedar Hills, farmers from just outside the HOA border, even some of the board members. Pete brought ribs. Mrs. Mahoney made lemon squares that disappeared in minutes. Nobody mentioned the wedding. They didn't need to. They just laughed and ate and stood on land that had once been taken for granted but was now earned back, foot by foot. The field bloomed wild that season. Clover, wheatgrass, and little sunflowers sprouted along the tilled line. Nature doesn't care about drama. It just grows if you let it. I sat on the porch that evening, watching the last guests drift off under the pink of a setting sky. Pete dropped into the chair beside me, beer in hand. "You ever think she'll try anything again?" he asked. I shook my head.
No.
She learned the hard way. "Still," he said, grinning, "if she ever throws a party on your land again, mind if I help plow?" I chuckled. "Next time, you can drive." Because out here on the land my grandfather passed down, respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned. Through work. Through boundaries. Through the simple act of standing your ground, no matter how many chairs they set up in your way. Karen had forgotten that. And in the end, it wasn't just her wedding that got uprooted. It was the illusion of control she'd wrapped around this neighborhood for far too long. She threw a wedding on my tractor path. I fired up the plow. And the earth remembered, whose name was written in its roots.